Hello, and welcome back to Behind the Olympia Curtain. My name is Amy Lillard, and I am the Executive Director of Washington Filmworks. We are at the end of week 4 of session, and we have 5 left to go. But it's going well. That's what I'll say. Before I jump into all of the updates today, I want to start by thanking Washington Filmworks staff. They're working really, really hard, and I just want to acknowledge that very publicly. Like, what you're seeing here is always forward-facing, behind the scenes. It's like responding to elected officials and drafting language and getting out releases and doing speaking engagements. Like, they are just every single day coming to work and really doing an extraordinary job. So I want to thank them for their passion and their commitment, and thank them by name. So that's Julie, and Carmen, and Marina, and Sheena, and Vicky. So thanks for your incredible efforts so far, and it's an honor to work with you guys every day. So with that, I want to jump into all the updates. Just like all of the other weeks, it's been very busy. I'm going to start by, I got a couple of questions this week about why the bills have turned into S. There's an S at the front ends. So our Senate bill is now SSB 5760, and the House bill is SHB 1914. So that just means it's substitute. It's substitute Senate bill 5760, substitute House bill 1914. And that just indicates that there's been an amendment in committee. So nothing too terribly exciting there, but that's exactly why it's happening. But let's talk a little bit about what's been happening with the bills this week. This morning, as a matter of fact, at 8 a.m., we had our House Finance meeting. 564 people signing on in support of the bill, crushing the previous record, one might add, of 473. So thanks for showing up with that. That's amazing. We had a rousing introduction to our testimony from prime sponsor Marcus Riccelli. He's always wonderful to work with and super excited about this bill and the industry. Our testimony was quite focused this time because it's a budget committee. We talked about the economic impact of the program, and then we also spent time talking about our DEI work as well. With that hearing done, the next step in that process is moving on to what's called executive session in the House Finance Committee. In executive session, they are talking about the bills in anticipation of voting it out of committee. So that's the next step in the House. We're working every day to see when that executive session is going to happen. So stick with us for more updates. The Senate bill, we're in the same place that we were last week, where it was referred to the Ways and Means Committee. We're waiting for the Ways and Means Committee is the Budget Committee in the Senate. We're waiting for our hearing date, and we're working behind the scenes to get that done. I will mention, very similar to the House bill, we will be issuing an action alert to ask you to sign on in support of that bill. I cannot emphasize enough how deeply impacted committee members are by you signing on to support bills. That groundswell of support in the House Finance Committee was mentioned today. Again, 564 people in the House Finance Committee signed on for support. I'm looking to crush that on the Senate side. So take 2 minutes when you see that sign on for support action alert. It's an amazing way to get your voice heard and to participate in the process. So look for that coming shortly into your inboxes or on social. I do want to spend just a couple of seconds here talking about all of the sign-ons that you have done. This week, we sent over 950 names of individuals from every legislative district in Washington state from the petition of support. So if you sign on to the petition of support, what we did this week is we sent it to your elected officials, letting them know that you had signed on and that there were people living in their district that supported the work of film and the 2 bills that we're trying to pass. So it's 954 people. That's an incredible number. And the fact that we had representation in every single legislative district also an incredible job. So thank you for being part of that process. In addition to that, we talked about the 564 people on the House Finance Committee. And then finally, we upped our game this week with a business letter of support. We now have 114 signatures on the business letter of support. If you are a business owner that supports film, the deadline to sign on to that business letter of support is next Wednesday. So things are going great. We're moving forward. Stick with us. And because this is budget and business week, I thought it would be a really great idea to invite our special guest, Lacey Levitt, to the conversation. Hey there.
Hello.
Ooh, I think you're muted.
Am I still muted?
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thanks for joining us. We thought you were the perfect guest tonight because you, in the roles and the many roles that you have in the film industry, are often thinking about the business side of film. So since we're aligning with those, that part of the conversation this week, I would love for you to just start like for those people who might not know you, if you can tell us a little bit about your background and what you do in the film industry.
Yeah, I'm mostly a producer, a little bit of writing, a little bit of directing. But I've worked mostly in narrative features, though have also moved into narrative television the last few years as well. So I'm usually the one, it depends on when I come in on the project. Like sometimes I'm working with Megan Griffiths from the first script idea that she has, and then we go through and we make the film. And sometimes I'm the person that the network calls when they're like, hey, we got a TV show and we're looking at Washington and what can you tell us? So, depending on the project, depends on what my role and when I come in, but it's usually about getting it made at a certain point, whether from the very get-go or just before production.
Well, that's a necessary part. Like you cover all aspects of the project, which is good. So we used to live in the same district. And so we used to sit in meetings together. And I think that you have historically handled some of like the harder, heavy hitting questions from elected officials, like with a grace. So I want to bring them up now because I also heard feedback from Film Day this year. So I thought we could all benefit from hearing your response to things like, Washington State has amazing locations. I don't think we really need a big incentive because they're going to come here because it's beautiful.
When that comes up, I'll say they do come here. They'll come here for a day, sometimes 3, and they'll shoot the Space Needle, and then they'll go back to Oregon or Canada and shoot where they've been getting the film incentives. I like to bring up in this session, actually, I brought up Shrill quite a bit because I thought that was a really easy to pinpoint project where you have a television show that Hulu made based on a book by a writer who was a Seattle writer, about her experiences as a writer in Seattle. And of course, that film, the TV show was then set in Oregon because that's where the production company has been making their television shows for years because they have an incentive down there that can support it. So, we had Seattle filmmakers, crew members moving to Portland to work on a Seattle book that had been turned into a Portland show. And that's heartbreaking. So to match, and this year that was really good to say as if we can compete with Oregon, we can keep, books and stories and films and television shows that are created in Seattle and in Washington State.
Wouldn't that be amazing? So it's interesting, like I'm glad that you brought up Oregon, right? Because there are currently, last time I counted, 37 states with incentives, not to mention those little places like Canada. So we hear a lot from elected officials in these meetings that we just have to compete with all of these other places and it's a race to the bottom. Why should we even try and compete? So if you're in a room, and I know you've heard this before with me, actually, what do you say to an elected official who says something like that?
Well, I don't consider it a race to the bottom. I mean, we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for unlimited funds. We're asking for a very, in a lot of ways, conservative, way of putting funds back into the state. Like we are a state that gets our money from the goods and services that are sold here. So having a program that will actually, instigate the business happening here. There's nothing about that's a race to the bottom. I mean, it's, we're not Romania where you go and you can pay people $2 a day. Like, these are good union jobs. We require health and pension benefits with the program, and they're really good family jobs. And then while we're doing that, while we're supporting the workforce, we're also then buying within the community, and the amount of small businesses and also Seattle chains or Washington state chains, but also small businesses is through the roof whenever we're making productions. So that's what I try to emphasize. And also, frankly, why I emphasize really Oregon more than Canada, because I think it's easy for them to think, well, they have unlimited money, they're a whole different ballgame, and that's true. But Oregon is our neighbor, and we're very, very similar to Oregon. And if we can be competitive with Oregon, that's something that Washington legislators can understand.
Right, and I always also like to bring up when we're having that conversation that there's plenty of work to go around. There's lots of content being made, and Washington has a place in the market. So we'll have a lot bigger place in the market when we get that $20 million. That is for sure. So,
yeah.
I'm wondering, you brought that up. I mean, I know you've made movies outside of Washington.
Not that often.
Not that often. I know, which I'm pleased about. But so when you're working on a project, do you budget other states based on incentive?
I do. There have been times where, because I'm the producer, but I'm not the financier. So it all comes down to who's giving me what amount of money to make the project. So, there was a film that we made this summer, and we weren't sure that we were going to get the incentive. So I had to budget for another state that did have, and that I knew had incentive money. So, for us, thankfully on that project, we had all Washington executive producer, director, everyone on board. But, if we weren't able to make the budget we needed with the amount of money we had happen here, we would have to go to another state. And that's really why, that's why projects like Shrill haven't been able to come here. We can't support high budget, long form television content with the incentive program being as small as it is. We can get the smaller budget shows, Three Busy Debras has a very short season and they're 15-minute episodes. So that kind of budget can work here. But when you're talking half hour, an hour, and you're talking 13, 22 episodes, we've just never had the ability to support that. But Oregon has, and to see what they've done has been pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
it's there for sure. It's just a matter of, can it happen?
Yeah. So, I do just want to say a public thank you to Tim Williams in Oregon, who is my counterpart down there, because we talk a lot about, first of all, when people call Oregon, they call Washington because we have similar locations and infrastructure and things like that, as you're saying. And he's just been so generous with helping us to provide some, look at what $20 million in Oregon did and what are the impacts here. And so that has been very compelling. And it's a great model. Like you said, they've got some great work happening down there and bigger shows, bigger budgets. So we're looking forward to that. Fingers crossed. We're going into this time in the campaign where we've had a lot of movement on the bill, but a lot of stuff is going to start, we're moving through committees, and then it's going to get quiet, right? Things get moving around, and as they figure things out in Olympia. And we're going to do some pushes to ask people to write their legislators, right? You and I, before we hopped on here tonight, we're talking about all the things that we've done with legislators in terms of writing and our personal stories. It's a little weird, right? If you're not accustomed to advocating very much to write your elected officials, you've done it a lot. What do you say? What do you write? What should be the headline? What do you suggest? Because we're going to be making a public call to action around that.
Yeah, I encourage folks to really tell their own personal story. We're all, even if you're not the writer on a project, we're all working in the storytelling business. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, in this process, I've certainly gotten to know I've gotten much more politically active since starting to do, I've always been a politically active person, but through this process of being involved with either the film pack or just with the film days, it's you start to see your legislators year after year after year. So you actually start to establish relationship, which is great. There's been legislators who have disagreed with me on this subject, but I see them and I remind them, and we have a good congenial relationship. And eventually, sometimes you get them to come around. But yeah, I think when you're reaching out to them, and if you can find out anything you know about them, and if you know anything that you guys have in common, I think that's really good. You know, take a look at their homepage, take a look at their Wikipedia page. You know, if they're in your district, they live by you. So it's really great to, if you can point to specific examples of projects you've shot in the area. You know, if you did even if you're a student, if like you've shot a student film at a particular coffee shop, talk about what a wonderful experience you had and how that coffee shop supported you, and really just have the focus on local and what you think could impact them the most. So that's what I like to do. A little bit of research, a little bit of Google really helps.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. This is a kind of a follow-up question to that. Like, if you have never worked on an incentive project or called our film office or, you know, been closely affiliated with Filmworks in general, what should those people write? Why is it? What would you say about that?
I would do the same thing. I mean, say you're, you know, well, you know, if you're, you know, to tell your story, if you are, you know, inspiring to be a full-time, you know, filmmaker, or if you are, you know, you are, but you haven't been an incentive project yet, like whether, you know, the first two feature films that I made, neither of them were through the incentive program. You know, they were too low budget. We were just getting started. But I still went to the film days. I still supported the project because the amount of overall work and infrastructure we get is dependent on the bigger tentpole projects we get to the overall state. You know, like the Z Nations helps everybody. It trains people up. You know, the Deborahs keeps people here for 6 months so they don't have to travel, and then they're in town, and then they do the commercials afterwards. You know, like all of these projects help the pool. You know, so that's, I wouldn't actually change a thing. I wouldn't mention like, here are the incentive projects I've done, if you don't have that to write, but you can still say, here's my story and here's why film is important. And this is why I want to stay here and make my living working in the film business in this district, your district.
That is like the most beautiful transition to my next question, which I have on my list, which is, you know, the pull to move to places like LA or New York is real, but you are committed to Washington. You've been like here. What do you love? What do you love about filming in Washington? Like, tell me more about that.
Well, obviously the people, obviously the Crewtopia that we have here. And, you know, we've definitely lost a lot of folks to move. I mean, it's been, you know, there have been times even pre-pandemic where it's been really hard, depending on which side of the state you're on with our teeny tiny pool of money. It's like, oh, we've got a TV show over there. There's not as much over here. Oh, there's a TV show here. There's not as much as over there. Like, that's why we obviously need to increase it. But, you know, I mean, I don't know. Technically, I was born in Oregon, actually, which is funny, but I moved before I was one. I was moved before. And I love Oregon.
All right.
I love Oregon. I absolutely love it. I love Portland, and they've been amazing. But yeah, Washington State, I mean, I'm so full of pride for like how gorgeous our state is. And I know you get to tell people this all the time when they call, the fact that we have every type of geographical, what is it, like, I can't remember the name of it, but every type of geography that you need, that you could possibly want in Washington State, or in the United States, you can get it here in Washington. I mean, the fact that Megan was able to film a movie that took place completely in like Nevada and New Mexico, all in Eastern Washington, I mean, that's just fantastic. So yeah, I don't know. I'm very, very biased, and I think it's worth it. And I think the quality of life is good. I mean, I love LA. Don't get me wrong. I love visiting. I love all my friends that are down there now, but I don't think you can have the same quality of life and the quality of life for your entire family that you can up here in Washington, no matter where you are in Washington. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's as important to live happy as it is to make great projects. So
is that not the truth, right? Yeah. Isn't that the truth? That's such a nice way to kind of wrap up that conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us some answers to some of the harder hitting questions, you know, that we get with elected officials. But, you know, as we close out week 4, 5 weeks to go, but who's counting? You know, I spend a lot of time right now talking to elected officials, talking to committee staff. I am hearing every single day how impactful what you are saying, what you are writing, what you are doing is. I get the privilege of talking to them every day, but you have to know everything we're talking about is the work that you're doing on this campaign and being present and telling your stories. And like I said, it's going to get a little quiet you know, when we get out of those committees, which is our next hurdle, getting out of those 2 committees, listen, it's going to go quiet. We're going to need you to keep the pressure on and continue to participate. But again, just want to leave this evening reminding you that what you're doing, I'm hearing it every day, matters, and I'm hearing about how great your stories are. So keep up the great work. Come back next week, and let's get out of these finance committees and go to the next step. So, Lacey, thanks for being here. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for all that you guys are doing.
All right, we'll talk soon.